As it
Yeah, the button now.
Pin.
Come forward, come
Okay.
Come forward.
Okay.
Can everybody hear me? I know you can, but
Yeah.
If you got your video on, can you give me a thumbs up if you can hear us okay?
can you hear me?
It doesn't matter. Can everybody give us a thumbs up? Yeah, I see thumbs up. So we're good to go. Okay.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming. Thank you for those in person, those on Zoom. Good to be with you all again. Just before I start, so last week, I see many of you were here last week as well. We started talking about lab-grown meat with perfect timing. Chief Rabbi gave us free advertising on the day of Shiur. The truth is that there's a whole other section there, which, there's more to talk about on that topic, which I didn't get into. Didn't get into the whole issue of married ayin, but beyond that, the question of the egg cells being para or not. So there's a lot more to talk about there. I'm not going to talk about it tonight, but I wanted to ask if people are interested. We've got another 3 shiurim in the series, so we can do another shiur dedicated to that topic if people would like. If people have had enough, then that's also fine. So let me know afterwards. You can write in the chat, or you can just drop me a line afterwards if you are or aren't interested in another shiur about the meat. We'll decide what to do based on that. But tonight I want to talk about something very, very different. I was thinking about speaking about autonomous cars tonight, but we'll skip that for another day as well. I'm going to talk about a question, the issue that's come up really, if we think about, the questions of modern technology and halacha and the clash and searching for precedents for brand new technologies, for brand new things which have happened and trying to find the halachic sources for them. So there's probably no question that has been dealt with to this extent, no question that has been as challenging as this, as important as this, with practical ramifications. And it's a question that's been discussed already for decades. The truth is there are new versions of it, there are new adjustments being made to it all the time. And that is the question I want to deal with tonight. And that is the question of, when it comes to IVF and surrogacy and egg donation, who is the mother? Who is the parent? It's a very fascinating question. We'll see, some of the precedents that the poskim bring for this, very, very unlikely places. The question, in a few moments, I'll give all the medical background in terms of what we're dealing with. We have the case essentially that you have a baby is born, and there's a possibility of 2 women each of whom may be halachically considered the mother, maybe the egg donor, maybe the person who gave birth. Nowadays, the question becomes even more complicated because you have situations of not just 2, but maybe 3, maybe 4 different parents. Who's going to be the mother? Will explain where that comes from and what the poskim deal with. So, just the truth is, this was in the news recently, a couple of months ago. You may have heard. So there was a case in one of the hospitals in Israel, whereby a baby was born from IVF, and after the baby, I'm not sure if they discovered just before the baby was born, after the baby was born, but the hospital had made a mistake, and the embryo which had been implanted back was actually the embryo of a different couple. So the question, this raises a whole lot of issues, and there's a whole emotional aspect to this as well. I'll speak about briefly, but the question there is asked again: who is the mother? Is it the one who was the egg who gave the genetic materials for this baby, or is it the one who actually gave birth? In that situation, truth is that the hospital actually didn't know who the embryo was. They only know who the mother who gave birth. So for practical intents and purposes, that is the mother. The chief rabbi wrote a letter explaining that this is his position, and he thinks that this is this is judged that the woman who gave birth, she is. He writes as a biological mother. I'm not sure if that, I think what he meant to say is the halachic mother. In any event, that's a case that came up recently. Just to say a few words before we get into the halachic discussion, just have to give this introduction. when we're dealing with these kind of issues, fertility treatments and defining motherhood, and obviously we're talking about it in very sort of dry level, maybe from an intellectual level, talking about halachically, how do we define? There's a whole another side to this, which is the emotional side, and obviously these issues need to be dealt with great sensitivity. If anybody knows, and this is far more common than people know, and far more common than people think. But for couples who are going through fertility treatments and these kind of things, these questions come up. There's an emotional. We talk about the science is very good. Science works very well, but it creates a great emotional toll, great emotional burden. There's a cost attached and all these things. By their very nature, these are issues which are very discreet. People don't talk about them much, but there are facilities available within the community. There are wonderful organizations that provide medical support, halachic guidance, emotional support, etc. Something people should be aware of, when we talk about a topic like this. But let's jump into the halachic discussion now. And like I say, this is a question which we'll give, as we did last week, we'll give some of the technical background, some of the medical background, and then understand what the halachic question is. And this is a question which the poskim have been dealing with for decades, very, very extensively. And it is really a paradigm for how we deal with these new questions of halakha and science and technology, and how the poskim have dealt and continue to deal with them. So, that introduction will hand out the source sheets, and just one page. You can each take those on Zoom. Will zoom up on your screen any moment, and when Mark's finished handing the screen, the pages. Yeah. So, again, just to explain what it is, that we're talking about. What is the question? And as I said, we're talking about here. I've called this the future of fertility. We're going to talk about some of the processes which are already taking place now, which are still may seem a little bit futuristic, but they're around the corner. Truth is that over the last 50 years, the last 20 years, there have been leaps and bounds in these technologies. Once upon a time, a couple was unable to have children, they wouldn't have children, that was it. And then the first real breakthrough in this was to go back to 1978. Is the year when the first IVF baby is born in the world, named Louise Brown. Is a girl who was born in England through the process of IVF. And the way it worked was originally, the prior technology to that was what's called IUI, whereby the sperm is injected directly into the womb. And from that would, if there's a couple having fertility problems, that was one step. The next step is what's called IVF, which is in vitro fertilization, whereby both the egg cells and the sperm cells are extracted in a lab. They are put together in a petri dish, and the sperm fertilizes the egg that way. And then the egg is then the fertilized egg, the embryo is then reimplanted back into the womb. Hopefully that develops into a pregnancy and a baby is born from that. Like I say, the first time that happened successfully was in 1978. That was originally the way it was done, was that just the egg and the sperm were placed together. Later on, the technology was developed where the sperm is injected directly into the egg in order to fertilize. And now there are all sorts of, all sorts of different things which can be done. The embryos can be screened, can be selected, those which have got genetic diseases and those which don't. And this technology is continuing to develop all the time. Like I said, it's very, very, very common. People don't talk about it so much. We're talking about it a little bit more. If you have a look on your sheet, source number 1, Israel happens to be a world leader in these technologies, like many other things. You can see that just the graph showing you over the last few years, the exponential growth in how much and how common these technologies are. You have at the moment, what I've described as the in vitro fertilization, IVF. You have about 50,000 treatment cycles taking place annually. That's just in Israel. And you have 7,000 babies, more or less, being born annually from IVF. That is over 4% of babies that are born every year. It means one out of every 25 babies that's born in Israel is through these technologies, IVF. Let me just say that what I'm talking about now, the halachic question, who's the parent the standard procedure of IVF, that is very, very common. That is not a halachic shayla, meaning the father is the father, the mother is the mother. There's no questions there. When it first began to develop, of course, Kenigsberg raised questions and said, this is something unusual, this is something out of the ordinary, not the normal way. Maybe in such a case, would we say that the father's not the father, the mother's not the mother? The conventional accepted is that yes, although And this is a different way of bringing a baby into the world. It's not all that different. And nowadays it's very, very standard procedure. And therefore, again, when we're talking about a couple who, for whatever reason, are unable to have children naturally, and therefore they go for these assisted reproductive technologies. Again, there was a question when these things first began to develop. Is one allowed to do it? Is it recommended? And nowadays, just about all poskim agree that it's allowed, that it's permitted, that it's a mitzvah. For a couple who couldn't have children any other way. Obviously, there are certain conditions, and there needs to be hashgacha in order that there shouldn't be mistakes, like the case that we mentioned. But in that standard case, whereby the husband, it's the sperm of the husband, it's the eggs of the wife, and they are the only two parents that are involved, right? Their fertilization takes place in the lab. Their embryo is then reimplanted back into the womb of the same woman from whom the egg cells were taken. There's no question that she is the mother, that he is the father, and Shalom Aleichem. Where the question comes up, where things start to get complicated, is when now you have a case of egg donation or of surrogacy. Which are really two sides of the same coin, depending on who we're focusing. So, IVF would be the standard treatment for a couple whereby, for whatever reason, there is a problem, the fertility challenge, and they're unable to have children. Sometimes there is a challenge over above that. Sometimes the woman may not have, there may be a reason that those egg cells are not able, she's not going to be able to, those won't develop into healthy babies, one may not have a womb or may not be able to give birth, whatever it is. So then, in those situations, you would have, either you would have an egg donor, so somebody else, and here again, the poskim discussed, is it better, who should the egg donor be? Should it be somebody who's married or not married, or Jewish or not Jewish? I'm not going to go into those questions tonight. But so the egg donor, so you would have the sperm of the husband would fertilize those cells. There again, there is no, there's nothing taking place. It's all done inside the lab. But then the fertilized egg, which comes from somebody else's fertilized egg, is then implanted in the womb of the wife, and then she's the one giving birth to the baby. So you have one person who donated the egg, who gave the genetic material of the baby, but another person who has carried the pregnancy for 9 months and then gives birth, or vice versa. If the woman is able to, has got healthy eggs, but is unable to give birth, so then it is the egg of the wife of this, who's ultimately the mother who wants to have the baby, but she's unable to give birth. So a different woman who is going to be the surrogate mother is going to have the egg implanted within her and then give birth. So the question is, who is the mother? Okay, if that wasn't complicated enough for you, so nowadays there are technologies whereby the cells, turn over the page for a moment, we can make this later on. But at the top of page 2, you'll see some diagrams. On the left-hand side is an illustration of a cell. It's obviously much, much smaller than this in real life, but the cell has got two main components. I mean, this is true for all cells, particularly we're focusing on the egg cell. So you've got the nucleus, right, that circle that's there in the middle. As you're on Zoom, you have an advantage right now because yours is in color. But you have the cell, which in the middle, that big circle, that is the nucleus of the cell, which carries about 99% of the total DNA of the genetic material. However, in the matefet, the outer membrane of the cell, you have these little mitochondria. And the mitochondria has got about 1% of the total DNA. So now, sometimes you have, there's a technology today which is called mitochondrial transfer, whereby if somebody has a mitochondrial disorder, or there might be some sort of genetic mutation, which is mutation is a very, very scary word. Mutations happen all the time, and it's common. But if you have a mutation which is preventing healthy babies from being born, which is in the mitochondria, so you have a situation whereby you can transfer the cell, the nucleus of the cell, into a different cell. In other words, you've got the nucleus of the cell comes from one person, you've got the mitochondria comes from somebody else. That's really two mothers who are involved. This is what's called, in the popular press, it's called a 3-parent baby, right? And then that egg would be fertilized. So you actually have that egg, which contains the genetic material of 2 different mothers. Then what happens if you take that egg, which is fertilized, and then it's implanted within the womb of a 3rd mother? So if 2 wasn't complicated enough for you, we have, okay, so we might have 3. So we'll come back to that as well. But let's see, before 3, let's go back to 2, and let's see how the poskim deal with it. And again, the question that we are faced with with so many of these questions, the similar idea is that, for most of human history, you couldn't separate these stages, right? Meaning it was always synonymous. It was the same person who was the parent, the same person who gave the genetic material to the baby, to the embryo, was the same person who was delivering the baby, and ultimately who was giving birth. Those couldn't be separated. So we never had to ask the question, what defines motherhood? Which one of those stages? Those two stages always came together, so there was no question. Now, all of a sudden, it can be separated, and you're faced with the question, which one defines who the mother really is? Give an analogy to another question, which poskim have dealt with and are dealing with at length, right? The brain death debate. Without going into the technicalities of that now, but the question for most of human history of when does the person die, when does the soul leave the body, right? Either there are certain things which happen at death. The brain stops functioning, the brain stem stops functioning, the person stops breathing, the heart stops beating, the heart stops working as well. So clearly, when both of those things have happened, the person is no longer with us. But there was never a need until the 1960s. There was never really a need to question which one of those stages causes death, because they happen simultaneously or very nearly simultaneously. Now, medical technology creates ventilators and different types of machines and equipment whereby you could have a person, one of those things has stopped happening and the other one has not ceased. How do we define death? Which one is it? So that's by way of analogy, a similar sort of question. There we're dealing with the end of life. Here we're dealing with something much happier at the beginning of life. So let's have a look. Source number 2. This is from the Encyclopedia Refuit Hilchatit, the Encyclopedia of Medical Halacha by Rabbi Professor Avram Steinberg, who is a world-renowned doctor in his own right. He's also the editor of the Encyclopedia Talmudit, tremendous Talmud Chacham, and his works are indispensable for any kind of question where we're dealing with modern medical halacha. So he explains the question in his encyclopedia as follows. Source number 2. He says, Kviat imahu, funktsia imahit mukevet mishnei malkidim. As I've just explained, that defining motherhood is comprised of 2 different factors. Number 1, you have havarat machatzit hamit'an hageneti, the transfer of half, the input of half of the genetic material, because the other half comes from the other parent. We haven't forgotten about him. And number 2 is carrying the pregnancy and the birth. Right, this is in contrast to the father, which is defined very simply by the genetic input. There's nothing else which the father does would define who he's going to. So now, as I said, ordinary, so to speak, IVF, this is not a question at all. But when IVF is done with the help of an egg donor or a surrogate mother, now we raise the question of who is the mother? Who is the halachic mother of this child? Ha'ema biologit, ba'alat habitzit. Right, so we could define it as the biological mother, biological based on the DNA, i.e. the egg donor, or ha'ema pundakait, or the surrogate mother, in whose womb the embryo, the fetus, is going to grow and develop. And now in bold, he says, right, in the natural situation, in the old situation, there was no separation between these 2 functions of motherhood. Now we can separate between these 2. One woman can provide the genetic material of the embryo, and another woman will give birth. The question is therefore, which is the defining factor? Or would we say that actually no, you can't separate the 2 factors, you need both, and therefore if both are separated, maybe there is no mother, halachically, right? There is such a concept of a person halachically has no parent. Okay, so that is by way of introduction. Before we carry on, I'm just interested to see what would, without any, you may have preconceived notions and ideas, whatever, but if we were to take a quick survey, right, who would say the 2 options are the woman who donates the the one whose egg it is, or the one who is giving birth? How many people here think that the mother is the one who goes by the egg, the biological one? Okay, how many people think that it is the one who gives birth? Yes, with a slight majority, we have a slight majority for the second. We'll see how that lines up with the opinions of the poskim. I don't know what the people on Zoom said. I'm sorry, I didn't give you a chance to vote, but you can write it in the chat. We'll have a look afterwards. Okay, so just to say again how this is, with these kind of questions, what we're going to see, the challenge, and all the poskim are going to talk about that there's a tremendous challenge, perhaps impossibility here to find a precedent. These things I said. The world's first IVF baby, and that was before we're talking about egg donation and surrogates, etc. But just IVF, 1978. So we're going back hundreds of years, we're going back thousands of years. We don't have a precedent for this the way that it's done. We are going to struggle to find a precedent, something that we can call on, something that we can learn from. Where do we extract the principles for this? With a lot of these shaylas, we saw last week as well, there are many poskim who will start quoting from Agadot, from different non-halachic sections of Gemara, of Midrashim, which normally there's a tremendous discussion in the poskim. Can Midrashim of this nature, can those Agadot be used as a halachic source? There are some authorities who are of the opinion that it's only when the Agadot are in conflict with the halachic sources that we can't rely on them. There are those who are of the opinion that even if they are not in conflict, that should not be halachic sources. That's a discussion. But we're going to see certainly in ways of trying to think and trying to find ideas, the poskim are going to call upon different agadim. Right. The second thing is, this is not a question that we can just say, oh, it doesn't matter. We're not sure. Last week we spoke about cultured meat, lab-grown meat. I don't know. I heard this week in the name of one of the poskim who's looking at with that particular issue. He doesn't want to he doesn't want to give a psak. He doesn't want to issue any sort of ruling. It's so new. It's so novel. There are no precedents for this. It's not so clear. It's not so obvious to say, is it kosher or is it not? But there, a person can be vegetarian, a person cannot eat it. You can buy regular meat. You can buy no meat. You can do whatever you want. Here, that's not the case. Okay, we're talking about, this baby is born. This baby is coming into the world. We need to know who the mother is. This has many nafkamina, many practical ramifications. Have a look in source number 3. Rav Zalman Nachemia Goldberg, the Dayan and the Beit Din Gadol, one of the Golim of this generation, he passed away a few years ago. He's one of the first to really write about this and bring different proofs this way and that way. And in his comprehensive article on the topic, in Tchumen, issue number 5, about 35 years ago, more or less, he explains, right, why does this matter? He says, Nafkamina la Beit Din Torah, source number 3. What's the nafkamina going to be? And this is just a sampling. Some of the issues. Im avlad asur ba'achoto me'em al-rishona, or she'asur ba'achoto me'em hashniya, or she'asur ba'achoto mishtei ma'od. Who can this child marry? Right? You obviously can't marry your sister, brother or sister. One is not allowed to marry close relatives. Who are the relatives? If we say that the first woman is the mother, then that would be one set of relatives. If we say the second one, then it would be another. If we say maybe related to both. We can ask the question: who's the mother? Who would they get their inheritance? Very, very common question. If one of the women is Jewish and one is not, we need to know who the mother is to know if the child is Jewish. And if the child is not Jewish, they would have to undergo conversion, right? So that is going to be a tremendous implication there as well. וכן אם הייתה הראשונה לביאה והשנייה ישראלית, או להפך, אם הבן חייב פדיון הבן. One of them was the daughter of Levi, and one was the Israelites, whether you would need a pidyon haben or not. And so these are all questions which are going to come out of this. Let me say as well, I'm not now going into the question of whether it's permitted, right, to use these technologies to have an egg donor, to have a surrogate. Again, in the cases where it's necessary, where the couple is unable to have children without using these technologies, the majority of poskim say under the right conditions, it would be that would be acceptable. But our question is, once it's been done, right, who is going to be the mother? So far we've seen there are really two options, right? Either it's the woman whose egg has been used, or it's the woman who gives birth. There is a third option that we said that maybe neither of them are the mother. There is actually a fourth option, which is maybe both of them are the mother. not out of a doubt, not because we don't know, but because really both are considered the mother. Have a look at source number 4. Shut Tshuvot V'Hanagot. This is Rav Sternbach. He says, לעניות דעתי, יש לצדד ולומר, שכיוון ששתי אנשים פועלות סוף כל סוף ליצירת הבלת ולהתפתחותו. Says, since at the end of the day, this child can't be born without one of these two mothers, right? If אי אפשר לאחת מבלי ראותה, you can't have one without the other. יש מקום לומר שלשתיהם דיניהם. It's possible that we might say that actually both of them are considered the mother, ושלהבלת שתי אמהות, and that this child has got two mothers. Okay, so we have 4 options here. So what do we do? Where do we go? Where are the poskim going to look, and where are you going to find the answer? So source number 5, Rabbi, who in his way very succinctly summarizes the challenge that we have over here. He says, right, for many years, generations already, the poskim are discussing this question. או משום שהשחלות אין בהם ביציות פוריות, ויש בני הזוג מבקשים תרומת ביצית של אישה אחרת. Whatever reason, a woman is unable to give birth, and therefore there's an egg donor, ביצית זו מופרית בזרע הבעל, וכאשר החולה עולה יפה, והזרע מתמזג מהביציות, מחדירים את העוברון לרחם האישה. I'm not going to translate all of that because we've already said it, but it's just explaining what the procedure is. And now in bold, in source number 5, says Rabbi Shabbos, השאלה נשאלת, once the child is born, who is going to be the mother? The one from whose egg the child, the fetus developed, or maybe the one in whose womb the fetus developed. Through that process, through that birth, the child became alive. And he says, 3 opinions. יש אומרים לבעלת הביצית יאם לפי ההלכה. יש אומרים לבעלת הלחם יאם. Either the one from whose egg it comes, who gave the genetic material, or the one from whose womb the child was born. ויש אומרים, התינוק זה אינו מתייחס לא אך לזה ולא אך לזה, וכאילו אין לו אם. Or third option, there are those who say maybe there is actually no mother here. So there's a 4th possibility, maybe both. He says, right? Both, all these different sides brought proofs for their opinions. We'll have a look very shortly at some of the proofs. He says, I think there is actually, none of them are convincing enough. We don't have an absolute proof one way or the other. And therefore, he says, we have a problem because we don't have a source. We don't have a clear precedent from which we can give a final conclusive ruling on this matter. It goes back to Svara, to logical inference, essentially. So Rabbi, he repeats this quite often. He says our generation needs a Ramban and a Rashba. We need, the Rishonim, we need that caliber in order to understand, to deal with these questions which nobody has thought of, nobody could have imagined for hundreds of years. Last line on the page. Due to all these scientific, technological questions, especially in this area of medical halacha, but we don't have the Ramban and the Rashba, so we're going to have to just work it out however we can. So he mentions here specifically medical halacha. This is one realm when questions come up, so because of the rate and the pace of the technology, questions are coming up all the time. It's probably the area where the answers are the most developed as well, because we have to deal with these things. People go see doctors all the time. These things are happening. But as I said before, some of the issues which we dealt with last week, we'll deal with in coming weeks. We can stay away from, people can avoid, but yeah, these questions of medical halacha really no one can avoid. So let's have a look at some of the sources that the poskim bring as a precedent for who should be the mother. So really, when this question first came up, the majority of the poskim seemed to hold that it was just like in this room, majority of them seem to hold that it was the woman who gave birth the one who carried the pregnancy, who would be considered halachically the mother. Over the years, that's either they have changed a bit. There are in recent years more poskim think that it is the balat haritzit, but that was at least initially that was the way many poskim felt like that. And why? Based on what? So one of the very, very interesting sources that we have, I mentioned that when you're going to get a question like this, you are going to get precedents or proofs, or people looking to bring proofs from certain agadot. So fascinating case. Source number 6, the Tzitz Eliezer quotes this. He's not the only one who quotes it, but many do. He quotes the Yonatan ben Uziel, the Targum, who says the following thing. We think back to the case of the Shvatim. Right? And we know that Leah had gave birth to 6 sons, so 6 of the Shvatim, and Bilhah, Zilpah, and Rachel each had 2. Right? When after Leah had already had 6 children, and she was pregnant with another child, and she thought and she saw that she if she was going to have another one, she knew prophetically there were going to be 12 tribes, and if she was going to give birth to 7, then her sister Rachel would only have 1 and would have less even than the shvachot, less even than that, and therefore she davened that should not be the case, that she should not have another one, and that she should have a girl, and then Dinah would. Okay, so there are many midrashim that talk about this, talk about what happened, because also there's a question that's asked, and the person is not allowed to daven a tefillat shav, something that's already happened. For example, the Gemara in Brachot talks about the fact if somebody hears a siren, hears an ambulance, you can't say that shouldn't be. Yeah, wherever the ambulance is going, it's already happened. You can't daven for something that's already occurred. Daven for things not to occur, that have not occurred yet. So what happened? So over here, this was the case. This was miraculous. There are those midrashim that say that Leah daven and the baby boy was changed into a girl, and she gave birth to her. But there are other midrashim who say differently, and the Targum says the following: that says that actually that she was pregnant with a boy, and Rachel was pregnant with a girl, and that those ubarim, those babies, were switched, so that Leah gave birth to the girl, and instead Rachel gave birth to the boy. Okay, that's the midrash. And again, how we look at these things and how we understand them literally or not. But the assumption is when the poskim bring these kind of sources that it's there, it exists in our sources. It's a midrash, how literal or not it's meant to be taken. But it's there to teach something. What can we learn? What can we extrapolate from? So perhaps we can extrapolate the following. Says the Tzitz Eliezer, source number 6. He says, Yonatan ben Uziel lo nishtana ubar klal, meaning the ubar that did not change. A different miracle was done. That the babies were switched. There was no general anesthetic going on here. This was not the techniques of IVF. Nobody's claiming that. Okay, but this was done miraculously, and therefore, so what happened was that Leah gave birth to Dinah and Rachel gave birth to a boy. And what do we see? Who do we consider to be the mother in both of those cases? Is the one who gave birth, not the one who contributed the genetic material, so to speak. And he says, you go by the birth. That seems to be a proof, he says, that the one who gives birth, that is going to be the mother. Okay, fascinating case, fascinating precedent. Again, other poskim, who, especially those who disagree with the Svara, will look at this and will say, this is Maseni said, it's miraculous. You can't learn this as a halachic precedent. You can't take it literally. This is dealing with, even if it's the differences between the scientific process which is taking place here through surrogacy versus the babies were miraculously swapped. Okay, that is something else. That is one source that the poskim look at. Another source, which is broad, this is going back about 100 years or so. I mean, the Gemara is much older than that, but this is the first time this is invoked and to discuss this kind of question. There's a question here regarding orlat and regarding a tree. So we know that a tree, the fruits of a tree for the first 3 years are forbidden. You cannot eat them, you cannot get benefit from them. That is called orlat. How do you define how old the tree is? The Tu B'Shvat New Year for the trees, that's very relevant for these halachot. But the question is, what happens if you have a tree which is planted, or you have 2 different trees, and part of the tree is cut off, you prune the branches, whatever, and it is attached, it is grafted on to another one. So you have one tree which has been in the ground, which has been planted for more than 3 years, so its fruits are no longer orla, and then you take a branch from a different tree, which is less than 3 years old, and you attach that to the older tree, and the fruit, which then grows off that branch, the question is, do you go by the older tree or do you go by the younger tree? Right? You're starting to see how this connects. So says the Gemara in Sot number 7, it says, Yalda shesibcha biskena. Okay? The Gemara over here is talking about trees, talking about branches, not talking about people. But it says, so you have the younger one, which is attached to the older one. Again, the older tree is the one whose fruits are now permitted, no longer ordered. But this branch is now attached to it. It says, Batla yalda biskena ve'ein badin orla. Once it is now a part of the older tree, even the fruits that come off that branch are not considered orla. So there were those, they should even kara, it was given for the last century, who want to claim from here that what do you see at the end of the day, just like it's the tree, ultimately the tree that is there, that is giving birth, so to speak, to the fruits, that's where we go by. Therefore, in this case, you would say that the woman who gave birth is going to be the mother. Many have rejected this as well. Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach was very, very adamant against this. He said, how can you bring a proof? You bring a proof from trees to people. What's one got to do with the other? That is not. But again, you can see, where the poskim go and where the poskim look to try and find the application, to try and find the precedent for these things, because it's just something which is so unprecedented. Okay? Those are a couple of the sources that the poskim who say that we go by the birth mother would rely on. What about the poskim who say that we go by the ba'alat ha'beitzit, the one who gives the DNA, who gives the genetic material? So we have a Gemara Nida, source number 8, the Gemara Nida, which is fascinating again, and there's much ink that has been spilled trying to understand this Gemara. How literal is it? What does it mean? It has other applications, but does it have halachic applications, or is it just something conceptual? I'll tell you a story about it in a moment once we've read it inside. So says the Gemara, Tana Rabbanan, Shlosha shutafin yesh be'adam. Right, there are 3 partners in the creation of man. Said we have to amend it today. Maybe sometimes it's 4, sometimes it's 5. But Shlosha shutafin yesh be'adam. Hakadosh Baruch Hu aviv ve'imo. Hakadosh Baruch Hu, the father and the mother. And then we don't know what all these things are, and we don't know how literal this is. But the Gemara continues and tells us which parts of the child each one of these partners contributes to the creation. So it says, Aviv mazriah haloven, shemenu atzmot v'gidim v'tziponayim, u'moach sheborosho v'loven sheba'ayim. Essentially, all the parts which are white, the lighter parts, right, the bones and sinews and nails and brain in his head and the white in the eye, that comes from the father. Imor mazrat odem, shemenu ol v'basar v'se'avot v'shachol sheba'ayim, all the darker parts, the red, the blood, and the skin and flesh and hair and black, which is in the eye, that comes from the mother. והקדוש ברוך הוא נותן בו רוח ונשמה וכלסתר פנים וראיית העין, שמיעת האוזן, דיבור פה והילוך רגליים ובינה והשכל. And everything else, the part we're missing, comes from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Okay. By the way, this comes up. Another classic question of Torah and science and technology, etc., is about the permissibility of, can deal with permissibility of blood tests and of DNA tests as evidence in Beit Din. You have DNA testing in all sorts of realms in terms of proving paternity. There's questions of mamderut. You have questions, many different areas. So when this was first discussed, going back in 50, 60 years, when they started talking about, the question came out, can a blood test be used to establish paternity in Beit Din? So there were poskim who said, no. Why? Because you have the Gemara Nida that tells us that the odem, right, the red, right, comes from the mother, not from the father. So how can you say that the blood proves who the father is? You have an explicit Gemara that tells you that the blood comes not from the father but from the mother. That was what some poskim said. As you can imagine, there were other poskim who did not, should we say lightly, did not really agree with this line of thinking. One of them was Rav Herzog. Right? Rav Herzog was furious, if I could say, about the Rabbi who said that, and he writes a letter, an amazing letter. He says, I don't understand. He says science is progressing all the time, it's advancing, and the Rabbanim put their heads in the sand like ostriches. That's his words, not mine. And he says, obviously it's not meant to be taken literally. It's not, this gets into a much broader discussion and a much broader question. I was reading something today about whether, how do we relate to scientific statements in the Gemara, scientific statements made by Chazal, right? All of the Rishonim and all of the Achronim agree that when Chazal said things, made halachic statements, those are absolute, and those are absolute authority, and we don't have the ability to question those, to question the validity of those, to argue with them. When they made statements, the Gemara is full of this, about the world, about natural processes, about science, about nature, about animals, all sorts of things. What is that? So this is a tremendous machloket in the Rishonim, like in the Achronim as well, some books that have been banned because of it. But there are those who say, there is an opinion in the Rishonim that says, like, whatever Chazal said, Torah min hashamayim. Anything that they said, anything that's in the Gemara, so it is. Probably a more widespread approach is something a little bit more moderate. Again, the halachic things, which they said, they have those from tradition, they have those from Kodesh, they have that we cannot question. Scientific statements, they follow the scientists of the day, they follow the doctors of the day, and there are things, medical statements that we find in the Gemara, which is difficult to understand what it is. It's very difficult to accept them at face value. So that is part of the machloket over here. The truth is, you don't even have to get into that, because this Gemara, who says it's literal, it's more metaphorical. Even if you say that Chazal knew and understood and were correct in their assessment of the science, it doesn't necessarily mean that. But what you can say, so there are those who argue that from this Gemara, you see there's a concept of a contribution. In our days, we'd say genetic material. They didn't have that vocabulary back then. But there's a genetic material which is donated by the father, genetic material which is input by the mother. Maybe what we can learn from that is that the mother who gives the genetic material, who gives the egg, who has the son, would be the mother indeed. Source number 9, Rabbi who was one of the editors of Tchumen, and he is responding or giving his ha'arot and his suggestion to Rav Zalman Nachemia Goldberg when he writes his article, and he says he's not there to argue against him, he's discussing this like a Talmid b'fnei Rabbo. But nonetheless, he says the following. He says it was up to him. He says, "B'sfaran yoreh ki ha'oreh mimena nilkacha ha'beitzit ruya yoter nechashe b'hem." He says, I would think that the one who gives the cell, the egg donor, or the mother whose egg is used to create this baby, that would be the mother. Hayeled notzar mitulkov et zel ha'av b'beitzit ha'em. So he says the child is born, the child is created based on the sperm of the father, the egg of the mother. That is what creates the embryo. It sounds like when the Gemara talks about the father, the mother creating the child. We're talking about at the time when the egg is fertilized. It's true that you need the womb, you need the environment in which the fetus can grow, but that is the place where it grows, that is the surrounding environment. And today, part of this process can be done in the laboratory. And this is 35 years ago. Nowadays, there's much more of the process that can be done in the laboratory. I'm not getting into the question of artificial wombs and something incubators, which can replace a large part of this process as well. If you'll say, okay, but nonetheless, there is still an influence, there is still an impact on the child based on the womb in which it grows, more than in a laboratory. This is just additional to the embryo which has already been created, to that which has been done at the time of pregnancy. Okay, so these are some of the sources this way and that way. Again, there are many, many more. The consensus of many poskim in the last generation, Rav Eliashib, Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, who spoke about this at length and said this is a question which we really do have no hachara, and therefore, since we have no conclusive evidence and no conclusive precedent one way or the other, we would have to judge out of not to say that there are two mothers, there's one mother. We just don't know who that mother is, and therefore, out of a safek, out of a doubt, we would have to be machmir to be concerned that perhaps the balat habetzit is the mother, perhaps the woman who gave birth is the mother, and therefore, if one of them was Jewish and one of them was not, then the That is regarding two. I just want to touch briefly on what I mentioned earlier on about the question of mitochondrial transfer, because this is another question which comes up. And here, I think, just to show you that not every new question, obviously the Torah has answers to everything. We don't always know where to find those answers. We don't always know what the answers are. But I don't want to leave the impression that these questions come up and we just can't solve anything, and there's always a doubt. Dafka, in the second part of the question, there does seem to be a more conclusive answer, and that is as follows. So again, we'll keep it simple over here. So we'll assume that there are two possible methods, but not three. So in this case, there is no surrogate. But what has happened is that you have the case of mitochondrial transfer. So again, looking at the picture, the diagram at the top of page 2, you have the mother whose nucleus, right? The nucleus of the egg that comes from the mother, but the mitochondria comes from somebody else. So here you have not an egg donor, but you have a mitochondrial donor. Okay, and then that is the nucleus is removed from the one cell, placed in the other cell, and then that egg, the complete egg, is then fertilized, and then it is implanted back into the womb of the mother, the one whose cell the nucleus was. Now the question is, which one of these two women is the mother? The one who has got the nucleus of the egg, or the one who's got the mitochondria of it? So let's just see by show of hands. Who thinks that the one whose nucleus comes from would be the mother in this case? Okay, who thinks that it goes by the mitochondria? Okay, who's not thinking? Okay, so I think we had an even bigger majority, and I think the majority of poskim over here would say that the one who has the nuclear DNA, right, more than 99% of that half of the genetic material, that would be the mother. Briefly, two sort why this should be. We've already seen before, Sternbach said that maybe there's a svara to say that a person could have two mothers. Maybe. Okay, quite unusual. But most would assume that is not the case. Now, Rosh Weiss, again, source number 10, here he has a tshuva which he wrote regarding this topic, and he starts off the following way. He says, it's axiomatic to me that a person can only have one. Okay, he says the question which we discussed before, of the egg and the one who gives birth, it's a difficult question. We don't know, how to separate. We don't know how to define what is who's going to be the mother and who's not. But over here, we're dealing with a different question. Over here, we're dealing with one that's got 99% of the genetic material of this half. It's got 1%. Okay, and therefore, if we assume that there can only be one mother. If you say there could be two, then it's more difficult. But if you say there can only be one, so it makes sense to say that it's the one who has 99% of genetic materials. Look at number 10. He says, so even if we don't have sources for this question, which we don't, but we need to try and understand it with intellectual honesty. He says, we have a principle everywhere. Many different areas of Halacha, in the 4 sections of Shulchan Aruch, you have a majority and a minority. We go by the rov. We go by the majority. This is we discussed last week, right? In terms of mixtures of foods. If you have a sukkah, you have schach, some of it's kasher and some so you go by the rov, right? Those were in the Gemara Shiur we were discussing this morning as well. You have a beite, you have different dayanim, you go by the so many different areas in Halacha, we go by the majority. Says I don't see any reason why we wouldn't say the same thing here. שכמעט כל החומר הגנטי מעצמה ובשרה היא האם על פי ההלכה והוולד מתייחס אחריהם. Why wouldn't you say that the mother, the one who contributes nearly all of the genetic material, that she would be the mother? אך באמת עיקר חלק ממד נראה בעיניי ברור פשוט. He continues, he says, it seems obvious to me, axiomatic, דלא ייתכן כלל מבחינת ההלכה שיהיו לאדם שתי אמהות. I don't think that halachically a person could have two mothers. Just like you can't have two fathers. The either high, love the high. If one is, the other one isn't. Again, you have to decide what's going to be one or the other, and therefore, go by the main, go by the majority, not the other. And Rabbi Professor Abraham Steinberg, we mentioned before, he suggested something slightly different, but also a very, very interesting story as well regarding the same case. He says the mitochondria, the function of the mitochondria to supply. This is taken from a speech which he delivered. That's why it's written up as something written, but something he read. So that's why it sounds a little bit funny. But he says the function of the mitochondria is to supply energy to the cell to function. It has nothing to do with the DNA that creates the human being. That is part of the creation of the human being. Would we say that if someone gets a heart transplant, that the donor is his father? Parenthood goes only by the DNA that has to do with the creation of the human being. He says at the end of the day, yes, there's different components and different factors, but you've got less than 1% of the genetic material. This is not what creates the person. Somebody has a transplant, somebody has an organ. We don't say that the owner of the previous heart or whatever it is would become the father or the mother of the person. And therefore, he says in this case too, he would agree with Rabbi Shavais that the one who gives the nucleus of the cell, that would be the mother. Okay, so I just wanted to show that as well. See, lots more to talk about in terms of both of these questions, but to show that that sometimes we do have an answer, we do have a conclusive answer. Again, the next generation of these questions is last week. I'll leave you with this. Last week we mentioned iPSCs, which are induced pluripotent stem cells in the context of the meat, right? Whereby now the technology exists that you can take a cell that has developed into something else. It can be reprogrammed. It can go back in time to become that. Okay, and this could be in the future. This really could be something for those that are unable to have children still with all the current technologies. But let's say a situation where there is no egg cell, there might be a way where one could, or there's no sperm cell, where one could take a different cell from the body. Sounds like science fiction, but it's coming. It's going to be here. That you could take that cell, it could be reprogrammed, then go back in time, so to speak. It could become a stem cell, become an egg cell, become a sperm cell, whatever it is. So then you could have, and then you could do IVF, and then a baby could be born. So you could have children being born where there is no sperm, there is no egg. You're taking cells from something else in the body completely, and then starting again. Who's the parents in that case? What happens if you could take a person's own cell and it could be fertilized in that way? So these are things which will, if you come back in 15 years' time to the next series and the science, technology, and Halacha, maybe we'll have it.
Why do we necessarily fall back on a medical biological solution to the question? Take a adaptive set of parents. They take a child which is biologically not theirs, and they raise this kid. Halachically, this kid, I mean, he's not a Cohen, obviously. If the father's not a Cohen, then, and he might be a Cohen or vice versa. But in terms of an emotional connection, does Halacha consider them his parents?
So this is what I said at the beginning. I'm glad you raised it. It's a very important point, and it's an important consideration. In terms of everything we're talking about tonight is not about the emotional connection that one has and the way that one views it in that sense. But at the end of the day, in terms of there is significance in terms of who the biological parents are, halachically, in terms of the questions we've discussed, in terms of relatives. At the end of the day, if you take the case of an adopted child, whoever that person's biological siblings, they're going to be forbidden to marry them because they're considered related to them. So there is still significance to that to that question.
But the last thing you said about being able to give birth to something without sperm, without an egg, that blows the whole thing up because now you've got no parents. Now there's not even concept of parents anymore.
Maybe yes, maybe no, but that's what we're seeing. Yeah.
I'm still not clear why they vote for the surrogacy versus the DNA, because if the DNA supersedes everything else, why is the surrogacy, which is just a container, considered? There are other situations which I won't go into where people have babies produced for them, and and then they try and decide whether it's halachically Jewish or not. They don't go for the surrogacy. They go for where the egg develops. So why do they go for the surrogacy?
So again, the question was, those in Zoom, if you didn't hear the question was why those, if we say that the genetic material really is the primary component here, why do those poskim who say that we go by the surrogacy? Why would that be the mother? So again, maybe I confused you by the fact that I conflated two different questions and spoke about them very quickly, one after the other. I mean, what we said at the end, in terms of Rosh Hashanah in his psak about mitochondrial transfer, what he's saying is the following. He's saying that in a case where the only thing separating the two is the amount of genetic material, one is given 99% of genetic material, one is given 1% of genetic material, I'm going to go by the one who's given 99% over the 1%. That's what he's saying over there. The question is where we have that's not our, what the difference between the two is not the question of which gave more genetic material or which gave less. But as we saw in source number 2, right? Rav Steinberg says at the end of the day, there are two things which a mother does, which only a mother can do in terms of the creation of the baby. There is one who there is giving the genetic material, giving the DNA, and there is giving birth, right? And who's to say that one is more important over the other? That's the question. Yeah, I mean that's exactly the question, and that's what Kim said. We don't know. We don't know what that is, and therefore we have to be concerned for both of those. But yeah,
according to the suggestion that we really should consider both of them potentially mothers, or halachically, would that imply that procedurally one would need to know the donor, the egg donor, so that in order to avoid halach issues down the road?
yeah, that's
procedurally what's done.
That is so. So the question was, if we are going to be concerned, out of safek or not, but that both of the two women would be the mothers, then procedurally, would we have to know? Would we have to keep track of who the egg donor is? Or the surrogate woman giving birth, you would always, because that would, in terms of who that is procedurally, the answer is yes. You would have to know. Has that always been done? So I can't tell you if it was always meant to be done, and there have been attempts, to regulate that in such ways, certainly in Israel. But yeah, there would be a concern. Oops. Okay, so we're going on there. Again, people, please let me know if you are interested in another share about the meat. Otherwise, next week we've got self-driving cars to talk about. We've got artificial intelligence. We've got a few other topics as well to keep us going. So
Thank you very much. Good night, everybody on Zoom. See you next week.